Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. We're so excited you're here with us today because we have two incredible literacy coaches from Baltimore City Public Schools. They are print literacy coaches at two secondary schools. We have Tami James and Zach Jaffe, and we are thrilled that they're here with us because they are going to support us in a conversation around Meredith and David Liben's book, Know Better, Do Better. We're focusing on Chapter 7, and the title of Chapter 7 is Unfinished Learning and Older Students, a Story. So we're diving into secondary, which I know Melissa has been dying to do for so long. So, Zach and Tami, welcome. Tami, would you introduce yourself first? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Zach, would you do the same?
Okay. I don't know exactly what to say, but I'm Tami James. I'm currently literacy at ACE, which is the Academy for College and Career Accreditation in Baltimore City. I'm working with grades 6 to 12 currently in ELA. Of course, the plan is to push out to other content areas for literacy support. And I am entering my 15th year in the district.
Oh, yay. That's awesome. Good milestone. You're halfway there, Tami.
I am.
Retirement.
I am.
Love it. Zach, tell us about you.
My name is Zach Jaffe. I am Blueprint Literacy Coach at the Augusta Fells Savage Institute for Visual Arts, which is a high school in Baltimore City. This is my 17th year in the district. Second year as a literacy coach, and before that, I was an English teacher for 15.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in. Zach and Tami invited me to be a part of a book club about Know Better, Do Better, David Liben, Meredith Liben's book, and really excited. But I also assumed, this is about like how to learn how to read in kindergarten to second grade. But that's okay because I need to learn more about that. So I was really into it. Then I saw, but didn't get to it yet, Chapter 7. And I remember I ran into Zach and I was like, Zach, I can't wait to get to Chapter 7 because it's about older students. What do we do? And so quote kind of hit that is from the book, and it says, older students who are years behind in reading comprehension might be the most pervasive and frustrating problem in America. And that just kind of hit me because I feel like that's what I've felt for so many years during middle school and high school. So before we even jump into like what the book actually says, just what were your first reaction thoughts about this problem?
Yeah, I have to agree with that quote. It was something that really struck me well. I got to talk to David Liben for a bit when we were looking at new curriculum for English for Baltimore City schools. And he mentioned that exact same thing about like, what do we do with students who are in middle and high school and are so far behind in reading? And he basically said there hasn't really been a good answer except perhaps to work on fluency, which is really what Chapter 7 is all about. Yeah. So when I saw that we were reading the book, I was super excited to find out everything that he was going to say, he and Meredith Liben were going to say about the foundations of reading. And it really just connected with what he had talked about before and what I've seen in the classroom about working on fluency to try and get students back, to the point where they can really participate in class.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the fluency piece that you're mentioning from the book so that the folks listening can have some context around what you're referencing?
Yeah, one of the things that they talk a lot about is building up children's fluency. And this would ideally be done in the earlier grades, but of course, sometimes we have to work with students who are behind in reading. And what they mean by fluency is that when they say the words, when they're reading, that they say them accurately, that they say them with a good rate of speed, and that they say them with expression, saying them with the right emotion that would fit the passage that they're reading. And I know my experience is like working with students who have been behind in reading is that I've seen that connection where they just They might know the words, they might know how to pronounce the words, but when you hear them read, it's not fluent at all, and it really does affect their comprehension. I remember a student that I had in a repeater reading class a couple of years ago, and we would sit and read together, and she would say the words at a decent rate. She would hear the words, but because she wasn't really saying them right, and because she wasn't really pronouncing them with the right expression, you would ask her a comprehension question right after that. She wouldn't know what she had just read.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tami, do you have anything to add to that before I jump in with more questions?
I was just kind of thinking, like, also like connection to fluency and many behaviors that arrive in the classroom. And a lot of times, teachers will assume that students are just misbehaving because they're bad or lazy or whatever it is. But lots of times those behaviors are problems or a mess for the deficits that the students bring to the classroom. I can think of one young lady in particular that I worked with last year, who, we were working with wisdom, but she was really even hesitant to state fluency activity. So one day I just decided to sit next to myself and, talk to her about, let's do your fluency practice. Like really has every class. She revealed that she did not want to read aloud, even with me, because she was a little embarrassed that she could not read and that she was skipping for particular words because she didn't know. It was like even the simple of the words that she was having problems. So eventually, she and I, we continued to work together. She agreed to work, and I got her to at least start practicing with fluency. But it is frustrating for me because I see lots of kids labeled as behavior issues when it really is kind of like that knack or the issue that they're having with reading. They're acting out because they don't want to reveal to people that, hey, I really can't do this. And they're feeling some kind of way by being in the classroom with their peers and not being able to form at the level or even at a level that would be considered, on grade level.
And I think one of the things that teachers do because they have struggling readers is they try and help by reading aloud or by having students read aloud to each other. And then it's like, well, imagine you're that kid who doesn't feel comfortable reading and everybody's reading aloud to each other. You kind of duck and hide. And everybody sort of cringes when you're picked to read because you know that you're not going to read it in such a way that everybody understands it. And it does get really embarrassing, and kids do want to hide the fact that they can't read that well because of a lack of fluency.
And then another thing along with that, Zach, is like I noticed, and I used to do it a lot in my classroom. I had to stop. Is that even with your read aloud, sometimes it's not even the route to go because students will continue to ask you to read for them because it's much better and more interesting when you do it, and they miss out on the opportunities to practice themselves because we're trying to show them a model for what fluent reading looks like, but too much of it is more of a hindrance than it is a help.
Yeah, but it's a struggle as a teacher because then as soon as you ask them to read, it slows down and it gets very fragmented and nobody's understanding what's going on and people are getting bored. So it is tough.
It's a struggle.
So I think that one of the struggles that I've had in my own career was that there were some interventions that really tailored down to, back basics of coding, phonics. I didn't feel like most of my students needed that. I think there were some, but most of my students fell in this fluent category, which I didn't have before then. But like you guys, it wasn't automatic. Like reading of the words was a struggle and took so much of their energy. And I didn't have a for that. Like I had nothing to help them step forward trying to practice. Have you guys? Do you have something similar? Did you experience something similar, different?
Yes, definitely. I know that when I would lead department meetings with English teachers, and we would talk about like what kind of interventions do we put in place within our regular classroom. it was always a discussion of, well, I'm not a reading teacher. Well, no one ever taught me how to do
Mhm.
phonics, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's interesting to see that in my experience too, and what they talk about in the book is that very few students actually need phonics.
Right.
And I think that's true. Like even some of the lowest readers, I sat down with one young man, Ishan, last year, and he could pronounce the words. He knew what letter combinations produce which sounds. It just took him a long time to get through it. So it wasn't that he really needed to review phonics, it was that he needed practice and get faster and make it more automatic.
Yeah, which takes a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And it takes resources to try and build that in, whether it's, a separate intervention class or within the regular classroom.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm definitely in the same boat as those teachers, Zach, where where those interventions were kind of left up to us as the teacher, and with the lack of knowledge, the background in actually teaching reading, it was like, well, what can I do really to assist them? And so it kind of like I had to rely on the SPED teachers and pullouts. And then that also, made me feel like, well, am I doing my students a disservice? Because I don't know exactly what it is that I need to be doing to help them besides just providing with opportunity for practice. It's kind of frustrating as a teacher because it's like I'm supposed to be able to help this student, but I really don't have the knowledge to do so. And now it's like learning. I've learned over the years becoming a literacy coach, help work with wisdom, help that, I don't really need to be an expert in reading, but I do just need to make sure that students have an opportunity to practice over and over again with the same text in some cases to, get better at it. It's just like riding a bicycle.
Yeah.
The more you practice it, the better you become at it. But yeah, it has to be frustrating because I know it was for me as a newer teacher when you experience students who have reading difficulties and you don't know exactly what it is to do, and there's like no real intervention program wide, so it's kind of left up to you as a teacher to feel that with your class.
And within your classroom, you're also trying to get through the curriculum, right?
Yeah.
There's always this pressure of like, oh, I've got to get comprehend this giant text that we're reading. And you keep pushing through and you keep pushing through and you don't really take time to reread passages. Now I'm starting to think it might be worthwhile to read less, but to read the things that we do read multiple times so that kids can feel more confident about reading it the right way.
Yep. And that kind of goes along also like with the close read. Like the more they read it, the better. Not only do they become more fluent in it, but their comprehension will increase because they've had multiple time to engage with just that particular text.
Yeah.
Tami, you just read my mind. I have my finger on a quote from the book. Maybe you're looking at it, page 129. It says, once they became more fluent, they started to comprehend and recall. And I think too often, like even with wit and wisdom, I've seen, I'm not going to say majority, but I have seen teachers who said, well, I'm just going to skip the fluency because that seems like extra or unnecessary, or they just don't see why they need to do it. And that kind of breaks my heart knowing that, on the other hand, they're probably also saying, what do I do my students who are behind? Yeah, so that's for sharing that.
Can I give you another quote there too?
Yeah. Let's do it.
On page 133. Yeah. On page 133, they say, disfluency is not only at the base of struggling readers' problems, but it is also integral to students' social and emotional well-being as well.
I underlined that too, Zach.
And I don't know what you've noticed, Tami, in terms of the wit and wisdom and people who have actually tried the stuff, but it seems to me that really getting kids confident, if they can read a passage confidently and then take on the challenge of reading it aloud to their peers, like that really boosts their confidence and makes them feel that whatever reading they have to do in whatever class, they're better equipped to handle it.
Yeah,
it does.
Can you,
like I was saying.
Sorry, Tami. No, I just wanted to say I totally agree. I think that I just wanted to say for those listening, I'm just trying to provide context if folks are listening and they're elementary trained teachers, that this whole conversation for my elementary teachers listening, secondary teachers are more, and feel free to jump in, friend. They're more versed in content, not process. So for secondary teachers who are English teachers, they have not had foundational skills background of how kids learn to read. They are more in the reading to learn category. And that's how they received their undergrad, their teacher training, all of those prerequisite courses. So I just wanted to just really quickly interject. Sorry, I hope I didn't stop the flow of conversation, but I think it's important that for any elementary person who might be listening and they're like, wait a minute, I got an undergrad.
No, it's a good point.
We did
Right.
not.
Because I'm in the minority right now. I just want to say, like, I am the elementary person in this conversation who also has taught secondary. But so I think it's important for you all to spotlight on this. But I just want to say that in case anybody's listening, so you know.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a good point, Lori. But I also bring up too, I went through a reading specialist program, and like we did talk about, so I knew what it was. And I even tried to like do some things in the classroom where I, time my students, have them read aloud. But it never, until I read this book, I think, and it like kind of together for me of just how important it just, like that's where I, like, yes, it's a part of being heard about it. And I think a lot of people do somewhere along the way, but hearing that, like, if they can't automatically like that, they're going to struggle to comprehend, like you guys have been talking about for forever.
Yeah. And from the secondary point of view, like even when we try and break down kids' reading scores and say, well, what's really going on? It always comes down to comprehension, right?
Yeah.
That's like the number one skill that they're lacking. Even if you're looking at deficiencies in vocabulary or in morphemes or something like that, it always comes back to comprehension. And so we try and work on comprehension, and we get graphic organizers, try and have rich and rigorous discussions. But we, as secondary teachers, we never really think about like, oh, maybe like just working on their basic flow of reading could really help us comprehension.
Yeah, I tried to explain it to one of my colleagues who's not in the literacy world at all. She was like, I don't understand fluency, what you were talking about. And I like, why would it be a focus? I tried to say to her, imagine like you only have so much like brain space, right? And so if you're using all of your brain just to figure out the words and how to pronounce those words the whole time, you have no brain space to figure out what I just read, like what does it say? Make any sense? And you're right, Zach, that doesn't show up in tests that we can give a student. We can't see that from data. You'd have to actually, like, talk to a student, like Tami said, sit right next to the student and see what's happening.
Right.
Yeah. I want to know how you both think that teachers would react to using grade level text. Because to me, that's the really important part here, is that we're not reading at different levels. They're using grade level text in order to do fluency, and a short passage from a grade level text.
Ultimately, we need them to get to read grade level text fluently. And that can be such a challenge, and it's one that we sort of glossed over in class. My experience with this, like, I would go back to what's probably the most difficult thing for students to read fluently in a high school class. Anybody guess what I'm talking about? Exactly.
Shakespeare.
Right?
I was like, I don't know. What?
Yeah, and Shakespeare was one of those things that, like, in my last years of teaching, like, I gradually came around to, well, why don't we just practice reading it fluently more? There's so much more comprehension when you have, like, a fluent reader doing it. So, for example, if you're playing an audio version, then the students get what the words on the page mean, which they don't if they're just trying to read it silently. But then it also means, okay, well, why don't we take it to the next level? Let's find some scenes and let's have you practice those scenes and really work on how to pronounce those words and how to be fluent with all of the lines. And that should really increase your comprehension. And I think it was fun and exciting for kids to do that when I started doing it. And I wish that I got to do more after reading this. Now I'm realizing, boy, if we had really worked on fluency instead of just practice, but like actually, here are some suggestions for how to say these better. Here are some class exercises for doing it with prosody, things like that. I think we could have done it more.
Yeah, I totally agree, Zach. Like, this book really opened my eyes in looking at some things that I could have done differently when I was a class teacher.
Mhm.
So it really encourages me in my coaching position to have with the teachers that I'm working with, to push them, because that the teacher mindset is what has to really shift when it comes to exposing students to the grade level text. Because lots of times we feel that we're doing students a benefit by giving them a text that is on their level, so to speak. But they need to be able to access that grade level text. And so it's like, if we kind of move away from, or start moving away from the whole pacing thing, like I have to finish, I have to get through this book. Later on in my career, before I transitioned into coaching, I used to just do excerpts of books, those ones that they pulled out for close reads, because obviously they were pulled out for a reason. And the more times that the students encountered that just particular excerpt of the text, the better they comprehended, the better their writing became, because they were actually able to utilize what, kids are going to write about what they know. So if they know this text and they know it like the back of their hand, because they've had multiple opportunities to engage with this particular text, they're going to be able to write about it. And so it's like, I think we do have to kind of like move our mindset, shift our mindset and move into thinking that, maybe it's not about us just getting through the curriculum or getting through the book per se, like we have to read this whole book, but really looking deeply at the parts of the book that are most important, and looking at the parts of the book that we really need to read, and giving students an opportunity to engage with those excerpts more often, so that, that they do have those opportunities to engage grade level text, send things home for them to practice. Like you said, Zach, especially like with Shakespeare, even breaking it down to, looking at what we think these words mean, because, it's a different, in a sense, it's a different language. Like, it's English to us, but for them, it's a foreign language. So it's like we have to give them an opportunity to engage and learn what those words mean. But
I don't know. I still kind of think it's a tough language.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, well, it is. It definitely is. But, a lot of kids they don't get, like it says in the book, kind of looking on 132 at the top, says they didn't get the full advantage of learning opportunities in earlier grades because they couldn't read what other children were able to. And it's kind of like, I feel like with that, we set them up for failure in later grades, because we haven't provided them with opportunities to read grade level text as younger kids. So now that they're older, it's like, did we do them more harm with thinking that we were supporting them with allowing them to read on the level that they tested?
Yeah, and looking at the way that they've described the partnered fluency, there's different parts of them. Describe the partnered fluency with a coach, or like an adult of some sort, a teacher or something, with two students at a time. Which I know, like, the logistics of how that would happen in a school is puzzling to me. But what they say is that can happen. They say at least 4 days a week for 15 minutes, that you'll see results in you.
Right.
And so, I mean, I've never seen that actually, like, out happen. But about even like, talking about Lori, like, that doesn't really memorize everything every day, but it's like the practice of this fluency done well does not have to take up a ton of time, but can have huge results, right? Like, it really can make an impact.
And another thing that he mentioned was the use of the technology, the phone, something like that. So if students don't feel comfortable reading with another student, then they can record themselves reading on their phone, and then the teacher can watch it directly. And, maybe that's a good way to get kids actually doing it at home, because it's like, well, all you have to do is record it on your phone.
Right. I think that's very practical. Right? That's like, absolutely. I think that's a good creative use of your voice memo.
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah.
And I think too, like, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think sometimes, especially high school teachers, but probably even middle school as well, maybe even elementary, are a little nervous to focus on something like this because, like, if we're looking at it memorized, then we see it as this like low level skill that shouldn't be a focus in our classroom, high level thinking, and so I wonder if people might look at this fluency work that way, as that it's not rigorous enough, when actually it will help our students to be able to get to that higher level thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a piece of the reading puzzle. So I think that gets at a bigger question, Melissa. Like, if the leadership in your school is walking in and your kids are doing, because I think that a lot of teachers are made out of fear,
Right.
For better or worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that the first thing a teacher thinks is, okay, when making a decision, like, if the leadership walks in and sees me doing this or sees my students doing this, what will be the reaction?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's curriculum based, right, like Wit and Wisdom includes fluency, then it's quote validated. But in places where maybe we don't have an aligned curriculum, or our secondary, please, great minds, make a secondary Wit and Wisdom curriculum.
Right.
We're dying for it.
Yes, please.
But where we don't have a secondary curriculum and we are working to put pieces together, we, like exactly what you said. Your principal walks in, there's a checklist, or there's a thought, and that is there a higher level question? What to use? Where are we on the Bloom chart? Not, is this fluency going to help the kids be better readers with a little bit of practice over time of grade level text? And so I think it's about a deeper understanding for all educators, because I always consider the administrators, and God bless them, who have been science, like sixth grade science teachers, or like phys ed teachers, like just really amazing people who just haven't taught reading or literacy.
Right.
And I think that they are at a disadvantage being an administrator, because then it's like a switch has flipped, and they're meant to be an instructional leader, and they may not have all that knowledge that they need to. So it's about educating that fluency is a piece of the puzzle, and really this is something that is helpful for students to grow as readers, to be able to access the text that we need them to access, want them to access. So that's
I agree, Lori, 100%. Like I believe that all stakeholders need to be present and accounted for when it comes to improving or into this literacy work.
Yeah.
Like, I think administrators, everybody that's involved needs to be really, really invested and dedicated to really understanding the work that or the task rather that we have in front of us, and understanding how we're going to go about tackling this, and so that it doesn't become like a punitive thing, because like you said, a lot of moves teachers make are out of fear. Like, that's the first thing that pops into their head when they're sitting down to write out a lesson plan. Like, am I being compliant with what the administration has set? So it's not necessarily that we're doing what's in the best interest of the students. Like, we're making sure that we're checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
And that has to stop. Like, we can't be a box check system. Like, we have to make sure that everybody is aware of what needs to be happening, and that they understand why it's happening. One thing that I thought was really impressive when we did the site visits last year to Ohio, to the Wit and Wisdom site visit.
Yes, you visited Mad River.
We went to Mad River.
Yes, on a previous podcast.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like, it was just so impressive to me that the principal and the administration actually sat in Wit and Wisdom PD, and that they learned the curriculum, and that they had to teach lessons, because I think that's what it takes. Everybody has to understand what it is that the teacher's doing, so that when you go into these classrooms and you're doing these observations, you know exactly what's happening, because you've been in the work along with the teachers, and it's not that you're looking to ding the teacher for something, but you really understand what's happening. So, like you said, we're begging great minds to come up with a secondary curriculum, so that the fluency piece is already kind of like integrated. But I think it will take some work to kind of bring teachers around and understanding that, hey, this is the work that really needs to be done. It is still rigorous because we're using these grade level texts, but we also have to address these deficits that our kids are bringing to the table. We can't just keep leaving them there because it's not going to get better. It's only going to continue to get worse.
And I think you've said so many important things, Tami, and this is really just one of the reasons why I love you and I love working with you so much. That, the administrator does need to turn that page and shift that mindset from being, I'm going to know a little bit about everything and have a deep understanding of, we're talking about literacy instruction, but also most likely all instruction. Surface level is going to do it anyway. So if we really want to change things, we've got to go deep. But then also being able to live in the reality of this is what we have and this is what our kids need. And right now we're finding that they need fluency work. How can we bring this to our schools to make it a reality that aligns with what we have going on right now? Yeah.
Right. And if we're talking about literacy in every content, everybody kind of has to have some knowledge of what that looks like, what that's supposed to look like.
Oh, good point.
I think also that one of the things they mention in the book is that the practice of fluency is never divorced from comprehension as well. Right. And so even if I was doing something in my class that was working on fluency, I should be very mindful as a teacher to still keep asking comprehension questions, because that's the ultimate goal, is that we improve fluency in order to get better comprehension. And I would hope that an administrator could understand how those pieces come together if the administrators were educated on that. And it's a matter of the teachers like holding up their end of the bargain, where it's like, no, I'm not just reading passages, but I'm using that to build comprehension as well.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And I love that you guys keep bringing up, it doesn't have to just happen in the English class. We know at the high school level.
That's a whole other podcast, isn't it?
It totally is.
You are so right. Because in high school, let's just pretend there's 6 teachers, 4 are English. That's only a quarter of the teachers.
Right.
I mean, you only see your students for so long. You need to have a student's day focused on actually reading. But I'm looking at the suggestions for like what to do whole class for fluency. And, at some point, like the 5th bullet is to hand out questions, text-dependent questions. Right. And I imagine in social studies and science, they're probably also answering questions based on a text.
Yep.
At some point.
They are.
So
let's hope.
Figure out how to incorporate other bullets of, reading aloud, modeling fluent reading, and, reading again after you hand out the question. There's other things in there besides reading out loud, but that's what I skimmed.
Right.
Yeah. Because even though we're not all trained to be reading teachers, we essentially are all reading.
Right. We all know how to read fluently, so we can model for our sure. And I want to you don't have to train to teach students how to read to be able to do what's in this text or in Libens.
Right.
That's right. That's a great point, Melissa. I think that the best part of the book, they're so tangible. The tips that he gives are so tangible and they're very user friendly. Like I felt like if my dad read this book, not in education, he would be able to understand all of the concepts and be able to execute it, with relative success if he needed to. I feel like very user friendly. So good job, Ben, on that one. Kudos.
Yeah. Kudos.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's a little bit of skill involved, but I think it's mostly will, right?
Yeah.
Mostly, can we figure out a way to get teachers to buy in? Can we find ways to carve out time in our classrooms because we see this as important? That's the battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to share a story. Something earlier made me fit. But I don't know if I've ever told you this. I think Melissa knows, but Tami, I don't know if you know, and Zach, I definitely haven't talked to you that much, so I don't think that you know. But so I started my very first year of teaching, 2 years of teaching. We're in high school. I taught 9 to 12. And I had minored in English. So I had taught English, and also they gave me a couple sections of reading, which at the high school level, which basically meant that I had every kid in the whole high school who was below grade level in reading.
Wow.
So I was intervention at the time before it was like called intervention. And I did a ton of this. I did all this fluency stuff because I had an elementary major. So I majored in elementary, but I was teaching 9 through 12, and then given this intervention-ish class, and it was really all that I needed to do. So I did a lot of fluency stuff. I also did expose to grade level text, but I didn't do enough of it in hindsight. And then in that 2 years, I just thought I have to go back and figure out what happened at the elementary level that caused kids to not be able to read to me by the time they got 9th grade.
Yep.
And so then that's when I went back and I taught elementary. But it was just really interesting to, I always call it Tarantinoing, because you know how he starts with the end first. I started with the end, which I think is very unusual in career, to start with the end and then go back. So I started with the end, and then I went back, and it was just to be able to see the foundational skills happen at that level, and then not like, where's the breakdown that happened, you know, between then and grade 9. It was just really interesting.
Yeah, it's so helpful, right? You've been at the end and see where kids can go or where they don't go if they don't get what they need at the beginning. And that really, really helps you when you come and teach that younger level, because it's like, no, this is really important. I know exactly what happens if kids don't get a good dose of this.
Absolutely. And we could have a whole nother podcast on foundational skills. That's a different one.
Oh, we definitely will.
But yeah, so I'm curious, Zach, are there any strategies you feel like that we touched on today that you want to work with your teachers or implement with teachers in your buildings?
And Tami, you're in a unique situation with, you have grades 6 through 12.
I have grades 6 through 12. Yes.
At least one, if not more, amazing middle school teacher teaching witness.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you're thinking about tapping into that.
I actually am. We had a conversation. She's a little nervous, kind of like thinking that the spotlight is kind of on her. But I told her, don't worry. I said, you're obviously doing some wonderful things. So I'm going to be sitting in your classroom just to kind of get an idea of what it is that you did with your students to see such a, an increase in your part scores.
Tami,
but
tell
one
us
thing
about
that
scores.
Well, she saw, if I'm not, let me get it right, Melissa, you might have to help me, but I believe with her students working with her that there was like a 33 either percent or point increase just over the last year for ACE. So I told her I'm definitely going to be coming in to look at what it is that you do, so we can maybe replicate this in the other classrooms. But one thing that she said was that she, with Wit and Wisdom, she did what was expected of her. She taught Wit and Wisdom. She taught it to fidelity, and she said the consistency with just working with the students on those routines and things of that nature is what really, really helped her. Like, she just wanted to make sure that everything in her classroom was consistent, and the students responded. So I'm really excited to kind of get into her classroom to see the work that she's doing. But again, with Wit and Wisdom, fluency is built in. So it's not something that, we necessarily have to work on. But I am thinking of a way. We didn't pick up Sorry here because they weren't sure if it was something that they could take on right at the moment, which is unfortunate. But, they have another intervention that they already have in place. I'm not really familiar with it. So I have to see once they start doing the pullouts exactly what that entails. But I do want to see if we can incorporate some fluency practice in the high school classroom, so that we can, see a difference across the building and not just in one particular classroom. And using her as kind of like a model to say, hey, like this is what happens when, you know, it's incorporated and when it's used, you know, because a lot of teachers, just from conversations, I noticed that teachers were not, I think, Melissa, you mentioned this earlier too, that teachers were not doing the fluency. They were cutting the fluency out because they wanted to make sure that they were getting through the curriculum at the pace that they were told. But understanding that if you teach it with fidelity, at least right now, we can bring in the other stuff later, but teach it to fidelity. Make sure that you're not skipping any parts. Make sure that you're including that practice, that you can see a difference. So I'm definitely going to hopefully not put too much pressure on her, but kind of hold her up as a model of like what can happen if we really do.
I think you make a great point. I think the first thing that is cut is fluency. That is the very first thing. And yet that's the biggest lever, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
And when you ask them why, it's all because, we didn't have time, you know, like make the time, make sure that you put it in there, because you can't skip that. Like they really need that piece.
Yes.
More students need that piece than you really understand.
Yeah. And like we mentioned it before, you know, high school teachers, especially high school teachers, don't often have that background in how to teach reading. So at your school, you actually have a nice setup there that you have at the very least you have middle school teachers who have that built in. They kind of lean on that. But I actually think the fluency routines in Wit and Wisdom are pretty adaptable. You know, they use passages from their actual text. So, you know, high school teachers could definitely pull out passages from the text and kind of adapt the routines of how they're using it for homework, like that, in their
And I was actually just thinking that because we had a conversation, you know, with the new grading policy, teachers are trying to really figure out how, because a lot of teachers really said that they don't give homework. they don't give homework that regularly. But I think that this would be an excellent way to kind of support the students in providing them with that fluency practice as a home assignment. And like you said, Zach, I wrote that down, like have them, you know, read it aloud and record it as a voice memo and listen back, and then also send it to the teacher so that that serves as a record. I think that's an awesome idea that I'm going to definitely bring up to my teacher.
If I know Tami, she'll be in that teacher's classroom with a video camera before she knows it and using that as a model for the high school teachers.
I probably will. We did have that conversation about video observations. You know, I love doing the video observation.
I mean, elevate that practice.
So I probably will.
Yeah, I mean, if you're telling high school teachers, look, this is what they're doing in middle school, right? Surely you guys can build on that. Then it makes the message much more powerful.
Yeah. Right. And a lot of the kids that we have in high school, you know, they weren't able to experience with the ninth graders that return are actually at an advantage because they did have at least 1 year of Wit and Wisdom, so they're a little bit familiar with it. But the older kids who had an opportunity to experience it, I think it would be a great opportunity for them to practice with the fluency. At least, you know, if we don't incorporate it in the classroom, then we could at least put it, you know, have them take it home to practice.
All right. So, Melissa, have answered all of the questions or talked about all of the quotes. I want to make sure we got through all of them.
I mean, we could keep talking forever. David Liben did a Q&A webinar, and he said, like, this is the most talked about chapter out of the whole book. So we can keep talking about it. But we've answered everything that we wanted to talk about, I guess.
I love that. Well, so I want to hear, if you guys don't mind sharing before we go, what are your best pieces of advice? Like, you could, I mean, this is the beginning of the school year. Get some advice in front of teachers as coaches who've been there, who've done that, who've read chapter 7. What's your best piece of advice?
I think my best piece of advice would be to practice with the kids reading something aloud. You know, let's find some kind of passage, very short, within the text that you're reading that you think is particularly powerful. And instead of just reading it once, like have the kids practice and read it out loud. And and maybe build up confidence of some of those kids who have been at the lower end, so that they can read it out loud to the rest of their peers. Like, imagine if you, on a Monday, told a student, hey, I want you to read this out loud to the whole class on Friday. And I'm going to sit with you and practice it a few times so that you feel confident. What that would do for that student when Friday came around and they were able to show their students, like, hey, I got this, I can do this. Like, I think just like taking that viewpoint of, let's read some passages aloud, let me model for the students, but not do all the work for the students, let them practice as well. That would be one thing I would encourage people to practice.
That's great. Tami, what are you thinking? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Melissa.
Well, listen.
Let Tami go first.
Okay, go ahead, Tami.
No, I was just going to say, when
thinking,
Zach was saying that, I've been thinking about it like with just one first. Like this could, if it's a whole new thing for teachers, that maybe just thinking about, like, can I help one student become a more fluent reader might be one way to start there.
Just one.
Just to start.
Just one.
I like that. This is what you're brilliant, Melissa.
Only occasionally.
I'm thinking that, not to create rebels, but I'm thinking that my advice would be to not be afraid to take the chance. Like, step out of that discomfort or that fear of what's going to happen if someone comes into my classroom and sees this, but be confident enough in the work that you're doing with your students that if someone does question why you're doing this type of work in your classroom, that you can say, this is why I'm doing it, because the students need it. Also, like what Zach said, that repeated practice is key. It's necessary. I can recall last year, one of the teachers asking, why do the students have to keep reading the same poem over and over and over again? And not zero, like, they're tired of it. I'm tired of it. And my response to her was, well, what did they learn from it? Like, do they know the poem? Are they able to give you back the answers to the questions that you're asking them? And of course they were. And I said, well, that's why they're reading it over and over again, because the more exposure they have to that particular text, the easier it's going to be for them to produce a piece of writing that is solid, that is precise, but also demonstrates the knowledge that they picked up. But so, like, don't be afraid, don't be discouraged to take the chance to actually do what's in the best interest of the student. That's my piece of advice.
Yeah.
And see what the difference is.
And I think I would add, like, we don't have a curriculum in high school that has built-in interventions.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the piece that's not there at all. And so as long as you're able to still reach the standards that are being set by the curriculum, it's kind of up to the teacher to build in whatever interventions might work. And I think, take the chance, go rogue, do something different in respect to the high school curriculum means try out some of those things and see if they work while still trying to meet the standards that are established by the curriculum.
Yes. Thank you for cleaning that up from that.
No, you said it really well. I just feel like I can't ever be explicit enough by, like, I'm always going back to, like, clarifying in my head too, like, just, everybody stick to the program here.
Right.
And focusing on that lane that we're in. I think that's great advice.
We'll have to have you guys back on in, like, January or February and see what's happening in your
Sounds good.
fluency.
Yeah. Sure.
I love that. Well, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. And for everybody who listens, please give us a 5-star review, write a review. All of our listeners, we appreciate it so much. You don't want to give us a 5-star review, then please contact us. We would love to hear feedback. But the 5 stars really matter. So if you love listening to this podcast or you're implementing wisdom and just starting out, this is an amazing resource at whatever level. So teacher or district leader or leader. So we're really happy that you're here, and we thank you for listening. And thank you, Tami and Zach, for taking like an hour of your day to talk to us. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you for getting
It was fun.
read this book.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Great
a
read.
great read.
And thank you for talking secondary literacy with me.
Anytime.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.